Thank you very much, Vladimir, for speaking with us. It's been just over a month since you were released in the biggest prisoner exchange between the West and Russia since the Cold War. How are you doing?
I'm still feeling completely surreal. I'm still feeling as if I've been watching some kind of a movie that began in late July when this whole saga started. It's a very good movie, but it feels as if I'm still a spectator in this. Up until a few weeks ago, I was confident that I was going to die in that Siberian prison. Everything that happened on the 1st of August is a miracle. There's no other way I can put it.
So it hasn't sunk in for you yet?
Oh no, absolutely not. I'm sitting here speaking with you and it still feels like I'm watching this from the outside and that I'm still sitting back in prison in Omsk. I was convinced that I was going to die in that Siberian prison. I was convinced that I was never getting out, that I would never see my family again, that I would never be able to hug my wife and kiss my children. I would never, ever walk as a free man again. This is what I was convinced of just 5 weeks ago. So it's going to be a while before this actually sinks in.
What would you say was your lowest point in prison?
Aristotle said that human beings are social animals. We need human interaction, human contact, just as much as we need, water to drink or oxygen to breathe. And when you are totally deprived of any human contact, any human interaction, well, to put it plainly, it's very difficult to stay sane, because after about 2 weeks, hence I understand why this rule in the UN, you completely lose your concentration. You stop understanding what's real and what's imagined. You start to forget words. You start to forget names. And you just sit there and stare at a wall. It's really important in order not to go crazy.
And you spent so many months in solitary confinement. What were those conditions like for you?
So in all, I spent 2 years and 3 months in prison. That's both in Moscow and in Omsk, including the transit on the way from Moscow to Siberia. 11 months straight of those 2 years and 3 months was spent in solitary confinement, in total and complete isolation. This was all in Omsk in Siberia. As soon as I arrived there, actually exactly this time last year, in September of 2023, I was placed straight into solitary confinement, and the last time I was in solitary confinement was on the morning of our release for the exchange on the 1st of August of 2024. I was in a small cell. It's about 2 by 3 meters. A small window just under the ceiling with metal bars. The bunk bed gets attached to the wall at 5 o'clock in the morning with a wake-up call, and you cannot lie down during the day. You can just either walk around the small cell in circles, or you can sit down at this really uncomfortable tiny stool that sort of sticks out of the wall, but you can't really sit on it for long. And there's a small desk that sticks out of the wall as well. You have no possessions, so all my bags were out in storage. All I was allowed to have in the cell with me were soap, a toothbrush, a towel, 1 book if this was a punishment cell, 2 books if this was a regular solitary confinement cell, my flip-flops and a mug for water. That was it, nothing else. For 90 minutes a day, I was given pen and paper to write, to read the letters, to respond to letters, to prepare for court hearings, to make any notes that I wanted to make from my book and so on. All that you have to condense in 90 minutes, then that's taken away again. And for another hour or an hour and a half, again, depending if you are in a punishment cell or in a regular solitary confinement cell, and I was sort of in one after another all the time. You get taken to a so-called walk, which is basically, it's a very small internal prison courtyard, which is not that much larger than a cell. Maybe it's 5 by 7 meters, still 4 walls, and essentially you just walk in a circle, and there are metal bars on top, but you can see a little bit of the sky on top there. And apart from that, I just sat in my cell all day. There was no one to speak to. There was nothing to do. There was nowhere to go. I was not allowed to call my family in the 2 years and 3 months that I've spent in prison. I was once able to speak with my wife on the phone, and twice to my 3 children. The last time was last December, just before Christmas. It was a 15-minute call. We have 3 kids, and Yevgenia, my wife, was standing on the other side with a stopwatch, measuring to make sure that each child doesn't get more than 5 minutes on the phone with their dad so that all the others could speak as well. I mean, this is a form of torture in itself, and this is a tradition that goes back to Soviet times in our country. One of the worst and most difficult things in prison is this constant feeling that you're just throwing away the precious time that you have in your life because you do nothing, because you just sit there in that small cell staring at a wall, and this is how you spend day after day, week after week, month after month. And so it's important to do something constructive. I decided to learn Spanish, and it not only fills up your time, not only does it occupy your mind, so you just don't sit there, you know, buried in all your thoughts and just, you know, sitting there and doing nothing and staring at a wall. But what's equally important, every night when you go to sleep at 9 p.m. when it's the lights out and, you know, your bunk gets opened again from the wall and it's time to go to bed, if bed is the right term, it gives you every evening a sense of having done something useful with your day. There are many things you can do in these circumstances, but that's one of them. And so I use the rule that exists in the Russian prison rule book that you can order books from your local bookstores. You know, every prisoner has their own personal account where our families can send money. There's a very strict limit on how much money can be spent. Every month, my limit, because I was in solitary confinement as a particularly dangerous criminal, my limit was 6,500 rubles a month. But there was this right to order books from local bookstores. So I had a Spanish textbook and I was learning it, and I was just doing it not to get crazy, frankly. But, you know, funnily enough, now I can actually use it, and I found out that I'm actually able to communicate in it, which is you know, every time in your life has to be spent with some use, even prison time.
Let's get to the prisoner exchange. The days leading up to it, when did you realize that there was something going on?
I didn't realize what it was, by the way. It seemed really bizarre. And it began in a really bizarre way. So to me, this whole story started on Tuesday, the 23rd of July, when you know, I was, as usual, just sitting in my solitary confinement cell alone. And suddenly 2 prison officers walked in my cell and escorted me out to a prison office. And there was a desk, a chair, a big portrait of Vladimir Putin on the wall, and on the desk there was a sheet of paper, a blank sheet of paper, a pen, and some sort of a pre-printed template next to it. And the prison officer told me to sit down and write in my own hand what was written on the template. So I sit down, I look at the template, and it is a request for pardon addressed to Vladimir Putin, in which I was supposed to admit my guilt, express remorse for what I've done, and ask that Mr. Putin pardon me. First I thought it was a joke when I saw this. I just laughed in the guy's face and I said, "What is this?" But you know, he didn't seem to be in the mood for laughing. A stone serious face. He said, "No, please write and sign this." I said, "I'm not going to write and sign this." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, what do you mean, why not? Do you know who I am? Are you going to proxy me? I mean, I would never sign anything like this." He said, "Why not? Give me an explanation." I said, "Okay, if you want an explanation. Number one, I do not consider Vladimir Putin to be a legitimate president of Russia. I consider him to be a usurper, a dictator, and a murderer, who is personally responsible for the death of Boris Nemtsov, who is personally responsible for the death of Alexei Navalny, who is personally responsible for the deaths of thousands and thousands of civilians, including children, in Ukraine. And I'm not going to admit any guilt because I'm not guilty of anything. I'm not the criminal here. The real criminals are those who have unleashed this war in Ukraine, not those of us who are standing up against it." He really wasn't pleased with my response to the prison official, so he asked me to put it all in writing. That I was very happy to do. I wrote it all down, and I added that I very much hope to live to see the day when Vladimir Putin is put on trial for all the crimes he has committed. I signed it, dated it, and gave it to this guy.
So what did you think was going to happen?
At the time, it made absolutely no sense. It was just a totally bizarre incident that came out of nowhere. And then on Sunday, the 28th of July, I was sleeping. It was the middle of the night, when I'm suddenly woken up by this loud noise of the doors of my cell being opened and a group of prison officers bursting into the cell. And the senior officer came up to me and said, you have 10 minutes to get up and get ready. I said, what time is it? He said, 3 a.m. It's totally dark outside in the window. And at that moment, I was absolutely certain that I was going to be let out and be executed. But instead of the local wood, the prison convoy took me to the airport. Just a regular, normal passenger airport in the city of Omsk. It's a large city, 1 million+ people. And I cannot tell you what it felt like after 11 months straight in solitary confinement, when you cannot as much as say hello to someone, to suddenly be brought into the middle of a busy passenger airport. I was in handcuffs. I was with a prison convoy, but outside were just normal, regular people. Around me were just normal, regular people, families, small kids, cafes, shops, restaurants, check-in desks. It was something totally surreal. At this point, I have absolutely no idea what's going on, because, if they were planning to shoot me, they would have just done it there. What's the point of taking me to Moscow? I saw that we were getting checked in for a flight to Moscow. So we get on a plane. I'm in handcuffs with the convoy around, but it's a normal, regular passenger flight with people with families on a plane.
Are you starting to think that maybe there are plans for my release?
No, not at all. What I'm starting to think is that there's going to be a new criminal case open against me, because that is usually the reason that they take you to Moscow, if you're already serving time in a remote prison. And so the plane takes off. It's a 3-hour flight, much quicker ride than on the other way. When I was transferred from Moscow to Siberia this time last year in September 2023, it took me 3 weeks in Stolypin carriages, the infamous Russian prison trains. We went all the way through all these transit prisons in Penza, in Samara, in Chelyabinsk, and so on. It was a 3-week journey. The return journey was just 3 hours on a plane. Needless to say, they don't usually transport prisoners by planes in Russia, so that seemed really strange in itself. Once we arrived in Moscow, the Moscow prison convoy, took me into a paddy wagon, drove me somewhere. When you're inside these paddy wagons, you don't see anything because there are no windows. You just sit in a small confined space. I was taken somewhere. The car stopped. I was told to get out. And it's some kind of an internal courtyard. And I see a yellow brick building. And I'm a Muscovite. I know what Lefortovo looks like. The legendary, notorious, infamous KGB prison, Lefortovo, that has been described so much in literature, from Solzhenitsyn to Sharansky, because that is the prison that once held some of the most celebrated opponents of the Soviet regime. I knew it was Lefortovo because I knew what it looked like, because I'm from Moscow, but nobody told me that. In fact, when I asked them where I was, they refused to say. And I had this most bizarre conversation with a prison officer, a captain, who was sort of registering me in the prison, checking me and filling out the form and so on. I said to him, I asked him to notify my family and my lawyers that I'd been transferred to Moscow. That is the law in Russia. Once a prisoner gets transferred to another region, another institution, their family and their lawyers have to be notified. And so I said, please notify my family, please notify my lawyers, because they're going to be worried sick when I just disappear from Omsk and they don't know where to look for me. And this officer, this captain, looks at me and he says, we're not going to notify anyone of anything. I said, no, by law you have to. You have to notify my family that I've been transferred from Omsk to Moscow. And he looks at me and smiles, and he says, but Vladimir Vladimirovich, you haven't been transferred to Moscow. You are still in Omsk. End of quote. This is what he says to me. By this stage, I've just completely given up trying to understand what's happening here. But my thoughts are that there's going to be a new criminal case, because that's the reason people are usually brought to Lefortovo. This is a central FSB prison, the main internal security service prison in Russia. And when they take a prisoner who has already been serving time elsewhere to Lefortovo, normally it is to open a new criminal case. Frankly, I struggle to think why they would want to open a new criminal case against somebody who had already received 25 years, which is essentially a life sentence, it's a death penalty. But this machine of repression has its own internal dynamic. It doesn't always work by normal human logic. So this is what I thought. And they put me into a solitary confinement cell, as usual. But frankly, Lefortovo was like a five-star hotel. It was like a little resort after Omsk, because, you know, I had a bed at which I could lie, nobody cared. I had all my books. I had my notepads and my pens. I could write all I wanted, nobody cared. I know it's going to come out sounding really weird, but I enjoyed my time there, you know, after my experiences in Siberia.
Then describe the moment then when you're taken to the bus and you see the other prisoners and you know that there's an exchange underway.
So 5 days I'm at Lefortovo. Absolutely nothing is happening. I'm just sitting in that cell, reading history books, learning Spanish, and so on. And then on the morning of the 1st of August, which was a Thursday, the doors to my cell are open, and the deputy director of the Lefortovo prison, an FSB lieutenant colonel, walks in with other officers. They bring all my bags, and they tell me to take off my prison uniform and put on my civilian clothes. And all I had in my bags in terms of civilian clothes, I had my T-shirt in which I slept. I had my long johns that I would put underneath my clothes when I would go outside in the winter, because, you know, in Omsk in the winter it's -40, and when you go into these courtyards to walk, you have to, you know, put something on not to get freezing. And I had my rubber flip-flops in which I would go to the prison shower. That's all I had. And this deputy director of Lefortovo asked me, "Why don't you have any normal civilian clothes?" And I said, "Look, man, I'm serving a 25-year sentence in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison in Siberia. Why would I need civilian clothes?" He had nothing to respond to that. He just said, "Okay, put on whatever you have." So I put it on, and to sort of fast forward, this is how I met with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz later that day. In my flip-flops and your long johns. In my flip-flops, in my long johns, and in my night T-shirt. So I get taken downstairs. I get escorted downstairs by the prison guards with my bags. And on the ground floor, there's a row of men standing next to the wall, and they all have their faces covered with black balaclavas. And I have to say, it's quite an intimidating sight. It's like a scene out of some kind of a Hollywood action movie. And they tell me to get outside into the courtyard of Lefortovo. And I see a bus, not a prison bus, a normal bus. Looks like a tourist bus. Black tinted windows. They tell me to get up into the bus. And it's very dark inside. There are no lights. The windows are darkened. And in every row, I see more men in black balaclavas covering their faces. But next to each of them, and these were operatives from an FSB special unit, and next to each of them, I saw a friend, a colleague, a fellow political prisoner, who've all been serving time in different prisons in different regions around Russia. Anyway, so this FSB officer, without a balaclava, we could see his face. He came up to the front of the bus. He took on a microphone. You know, it was just completely something really, really bizarre. And he said, "Good morning. I'm from the Federal Security Service. You will all be now taken to the airport, boarded on a plane, and taken to the place of the exchange." This is all he said. He didn't say where. He didn't say what was, you know, how it was going to be organized. Nothing. And so then our bus left the prison. There was a police escort. We jumped all the red lights. We broke all the speed limits. You know, broke all the road rules. It was a really fast trip. And I was just glued to the window all the time because, you know, I'm a Muscovite. I'm a fifth-generation Muscovite. Moscow is my hometown. I love Moscow. And I hadn't seen it for 2.5 years because, you know, even when I was transported in paddy wagons in Moscow from prison, there are no windows. You can't see anything. You just sit there in that confined, closed space. And obviously, from my prison window, I couldn't see anything. And then I was in Siberia. So I was just trying to catch as much as I could, just looking out that window. It was a pretty short ride, about an hour.
So I understand when you got off the plane in Turkey, I guess moments after you're handed a phone. Tell me who's on the line.
The bus took us to some sort of a government terminal building. There was a big reception room, long tables with tea, coffee, sandwiches, cookies. And a man dressed in a suit with a beard walked up to us, and as I know now, it was Jens Plotner, the German Chancellor's National Security Advisor. And he looked at us and he said, "Welcome to freedom." And just as if things couldn't get any more surreal, at that moment, a lady approached me holding a cell phone in her hand. And she asked, "Are you Mr. Kara-Murza?" I said, "Yes, I am." She said that she was a diplomat with the American embassy, and she handed me the cell phone. And she said that the President of the United States is on the line waiting to speak to you. And at that moment, I just gave up trying to understand what was going on here. And I took the phone. It was President Biden. I scrambled to say something. I hadn't used the word of spoken English in 2.5 years. I hadn't used much Russian either because I was in solitary confinement, but certainly not English. And I said something to him, you know, thanking him for this. And then he passed the phone to my wife and children who were standing with him in the Oval Office. And I hadn't been allowed to call them in all my time in prison. And when I heard their voices on the phone, there are no language, there are no words in any language that I know that can describe that feeling.